Can you crochet a mandala? That's the question we're going to answer today with my honest pattern review of the Mandala Belle. Hello, and welcome to Blah Blah Black Sheep, a weekly yarny podcast where I, Sarah Korth of SEK Handmade, talk all things yarny. Today we're talking about my pie in the sky, always wanted to do it pattern, a mandala pattern. For years, I have wanted to crochet a mandala, but I've always been fearful that it's going to be really complicated and that it's going to end up being one of those whips that just like lingers in a corner for eternity. But this year, I decided that for my birthday, I was going to dive in and give it a try. You all suggested that I try the Mandala Belle by Aleksandra Pavlova, and so this is the one I gave a try, and today we're doing an honest pattern review. I'm telling you the good, the bad, the ugly. Did I cry? Did I even finish? We're going to talk about it. So let's talk about how I felt before I got started. As I said before, this is a project that I've always wanted to do, but always have put off because I thought it was going to be really hard and take a lot of focus and that I might not even finish. But I got a little bee in my bonnet around my birthday and decided this was something special I was going to do for myself this year. I was going to give it a try and see how it went. I did a whole entire video about mandalas. I picked out a whole bunch of them and then I let you all choose which one I gave a try. I was so excited about your choice. From there, I decided to pick yarn from my stash. It ended up being a really special yarn that I was really excited to use. Then I downloaded the pattern and started to gather my other supplies, and I had a moment of panic. I came to you all and I said, I'm panicking, you gotta hold me accountable. And with that little boost from you all encouraging me, I dove right into the pattern. So let's talk about the yarn I used. I have a really special group of girlfriends, and every year for Valentine's Day, we do a little gift swap where we each get one of each other. I don't know. We all get a different person every year and we send them a little fun gift box. One year, my friend Bonnie got me and she sent me some really beautiful hand-dyed yarn that she had dyed herself. She purchased the yarn from We Crochet. It's their Simply Cotton Organic Bare Yarn. It's by We Crochet, 100% organic cotton, and it is 437 yards per 100 grams, so solid fingering weight. She had hand dyed it in this really beautiful purple color, which I mean, it matches my shawl. You know I love it. So I was really excited to use such a special yarn on such a special project. Now, I was a little hesitant of the yarn too, because most mandalas are made with cotton yarn, and if you know me, you know I am no fan of cotton yarn. But I decided if I was going to do it, I was going to use the yarn that was called for, and I dove in with my special yarn. It turns out that working the mandala with the cotton yarn worked out just fine. I love hand-dyed yarn, so as I worked, it was really fun to watch all the little color shifts and changes, and it even frogged back really well the few times I had to pull out a couple rows when I made some mistakes. So in the end, I really ended up enjoying using the cotton yarn. Does this mean I'll use cotton yarn more often? Probably not. All right, let's talk about the hook you need for this. Look at my face. This was how I felt when I saw the hook size. This was the second thing that hung me up. When I don't know why I didn't think that these would be made with teeny tiny hooks, but they are very, very small hooks. Now, generally, I'm not scared of small hooks. I've crocheted earrings before, and it's fine. I've used an even smaller hook than I needed for this pattern, but the thought of using such a tiny little hook in such a large project really intimidated me. The pattern called for a 1.75 millimeter hook. I only had a 1.7, but I figured like good enough, and so I dove in with the hook I had. In the end, it was fine. Working with the hook was not that bad. It matched really nicely with the cotton yarn, and I did not have a lot of problems with, yarn hook situations going on. Let's talk about what other supplies you'll need. There are some supplies that you're just going to have because you need them to complete the pattern. now that I've said that, I'm going to tell you what they recommend, and then I'm going to give you some other ideas that were given to me when I came to a problem with this. Most mandalas are framed in a metal hook. You attach it somehow. They're different depending on the pattern. For this pattern, you crocheted around the hoop and then attached the pieces that attached to the hoop as you went around the hoop. I had a problem with my hoop because there was no gauge on this pattern, so I just dumbly went like crocheting along, and right up until the end, I thought I was fine until I went to put it in a hoop that I had that was actually an inch too big, and the hoop was still too small. I had purchased the largest hoop they had at my local craft store, and I was honestly a little panicked. I did not know what I was going to do. So I reached out to some friends, and they actually gave me some other suggestions that I thought were pretty smart. You could just mount it to your wall. At one point, I had a bunch of little, I don't know, they weren't exactly mandalas. They were too simple, but little crocheted, almost like coasters that I had hung up on my wall in different sizes, in just like a spray of them kind of. And I just tacked those directly to the wall, and you could absolutely do that with a mandala too. Now, obviously, you're going to want to pick a place that you want it to stay for quite a while because once you take it off the wall, you either have to mount it to something else or remount it somewhere else. But now I'm thinking if you want to take it down and store it away, having it just have been tacked on the wall would be really convenient because you could actually fold it up then and store it away, take it out later, steam the wrinkles out of it, and rehang it. That's actually kind of genius. If you don't want that and you want it to be a little more permanent and also movable, you could also get a piece of wood and tack it down with nails to the piece of wood and hang that piece of wood on your wall, kind of like a framed piece of art. I wonder if you could do that with a canvas and like sew it in place. That could be an option too. I was very tempted to do the whole attaching it to a piece of wood situation, but when I was discussing it with my husband, he mentioned, and was absolutely right, that in current economic situations, buying that piece of wood was probably going to cost me just as much as buying the hoop on Amazon, which was my other option. They are actually floral hoops if you're searching for them. I'll also put a link down below to the hoops that I got. I had to buy 6 of them, so they were more expensive, but he's absolutely right. Buying a large piece of wood would have also been expensive. Now, I did get a crazy idea in my head, and if you do this, I want to see it because I think it would be amazing. My thrifty way to attach it to a piece of wood, I said, was to go thrift shopping, literally, find a super cool side table that was like about the size circle that I needed, strip it, refinish it, and tack my mandala to that. How amazing would that have been? But I did not have the time or patience for this. I really, really wanted to just get it done. Other things that I recommend for this project are some stitch markers. I got these really cool stitch markers from Twice Sheared Sheep. There's a whole bunch of them, and I don't know if you can see, but they have numbers on them. I found that numbering my rounds was key. Once you got going, it was oddly difficult to count your rounds if you got lost on what round you were on. And so many of them had such similar instructions that having these little guys to just be clipped on every 5 rows just made it so much easier to not have to worry about, was I on the right row? Because let me tell you, as someone who had to tear back several times, tearing back rows made me want to cry. So having those stitch markers on my mandala just made me super confident that I was working the correct row. The other thing that the pattern doesn't say you need, but what I recommend when working with smaller yarns like this, is to get yourself not a tapestry needle, but a cross stitch needle. This is like a tiny version of a tapestry needle. So it's smaller than a regular tapestry needle, which when you're working such tiny stitches and you want to weave your ends in, having a big fat needle, relatively fat needle like that makes weaving in your ends super hard. So the cross stitch needle is much smaller, But instead of having a pointed end like something you are meant to sew with, it still has a rounded end, which makes it easier to get under the stitches instead of accidentally stabbing through the stitches. All right, let's talk skill level. When I started this project, I thought for sure that the skill level was going to be like advanced, very difficult. But here's the thing, I actually found making the mandala to be much easier than I thought it would be. All of the stitches that were used in this pattern are basic stitches, lots and lots of double crochets and chains, some puff stitches and single crochets, a front post here and there. It was really not advanced on the type of stitches that you used, which was really lovely. I would say though, as you might guess, that this is not a beginner project. Even though this uses pretty simple stitches, I'm going to put this at an advanced beginner to an intermediate. Like if you're kind of right in that area or above, I think you could totally accomplish this. The trickiest part of this pattern, and I assume other mandala patterns, are not the stitches per se, but the tension that you need to have on the yarn. You need to have a nice tight tension. So if you're someone who's still struggling with tensioning your yarn, this is definitely not for you. And you got to work those teeny tiny stitches. And I just think that that's a little bit more of an advanced skill. You got to be really good at reading your stitches so that when they're little itty bitty, you can still see what you're doing and where you need to put your hook. So if you're comfortable with all of those things, this is a pattern I think you could definitely try. There's a lot of repetition in the pattern. It's worked in a wedge that repeats around and around the circle. So once you've got that first little wedge figured out, you just keep doing the same thing over and over again for every round. I actually found that to be a lot of fun, and it actually worked up pretty quickly. So let's talk about who this pattern is not for. If you are a beginner and still learning to tension your yarn and read your stitches, this is definitely not for you. As I said before, the tiny stitches and the tight tension are just part of this project, and you need to be really confident that you can accomplish that tight tension and really read these little bitty stitches. Other people that I would say this pattern is probably not for are people with poor eyesight. My eyesight is starting to get poorer. I've always been nearsighted, but now my nearsighted sight is starting to go. Definitely had to use my cheaters on this. Really loved it when I could sit right by my window and see my stitches. So if you're somebody who struggles with seeing small things, it's little. It's either going to be hard, or you're going to have to keep your cheaters close, or maybe it's just not for you. The other person I would say this is definitely not for is someone who suffers from a lot of hand pain. Between using the cotton yarn, the tiny hook, and the tight tension, this pattern was hard on my hands. Obviously, this is something you have to decide for yourself. So could you, if you have some hand pain, accomplish this pattern? Absolutely. I would say be sure to take lots of breaks, stretch your hands, and don't try to power through it in a few days like I did. All right, let's talk modifications and tips. I made 0 modifications to this pattern. Did I make mistakes that you could technically call accidental modifications? Sure. I had one of my outer puff stitch sections that ended up being smaller because I had made a mistake 4 rows back, and I said, no, I'm not going back again. And I had a little part at the beginning that I fudged because I missed a stitch. Those were not intentional modifications. And I would say unless you've made a lot of mandalas, you probably aren't going to want to modify anything. I do, however, have some tips for working this pattern much easier. First of all, I'm going to recommend these stitch markers again with the little numbers on them. I will link them down below if you want to grab some. I really like these, and I think I'll probably use them a bunch more. My second tip is to print out your pattern. Now, when I first downloaded this pattern, one of the things that I loved, and I continue to love, is that the pattern had a picture of the round that you were working. So the little slice, it was like a close-up picture of it. Loved that so much because I'm a visual person, and being able to look and compare instructions to a visual of it was So helpful. Then right next to that, it had the instructions, which were fairly short because again, you needed the instructions for that little sliver, and then you just repeated it all the way around the circle. For a really good chunk of the pattern, I tried to just use my phone and read the instructions and look at the picture. At the beginning, it wasn't as big of a deal because, you know, you're starting out small, and so there aren't as many instructions. But as I got deeper into the pattern, it got harder and harder to keep track of that stuff on my phone. I'm sure there are phone tools that you can use for this, but I was just like reading a PDF on my phone. This pattern has a very large number of twos in it. Chain two, two double crochets, double crochet two, skip two, so many twos that it made reading those instructions really challenging. So I hit a point where I just got really frustrated and I knew that I needed the pattern printed out. But I did not want to print all of those pictures. It felt like a real waste of ink and paper and yeah. So what I decided to do, and I must preface this by saying, I purchased this pattern. You cannot do this with a free pattern. If you are choosing to get it for free, which honestly, I don't even know if this pattern is for free. If you're getting it for free, you cannot copy and paste it into a Word document. You are paying for the pattern by viewing it on their site. But since I had paid for this pattern, I made a little modification for my own personal preference, and I copied and pasted the rows into a Word document so that they did not have the pictures with them. They were just the instructions. That way, by the time I was done, I only had 2 pages worth of instructions to print out. That was not the whole pattern. You would have more if you decided to start at the beginning. I don't want to show you the pattern, but what I found was that highlighting was what saved my life with this. So I went through each round and I highlighted sometimes every other instruction, sometimes just the number of chains between the main stitches. And having it broken up with different colors, you could even like pick 3 or 4 different highlighter colors and highlight different pieces of the pattern in different colors. That might be super helpful. But once I printed out the pattern and highlighted, I found myself making far fewer mistakes. Gonna give a little plug for the mild liners. I love these highlighters, and if you're looking for a new pen to buy that might change your life, I'm always looking for a new pen to buy that might change my life. I'm going to link these down in the show notes too. My last tip or trick is do not buy your hoop until you are done with your project. Because of several things, and one that I'll talk about in just a minute, you don't know exactly how big your mandala is going to end up until you're done with it. So I don't recommend buying the hoop to put it in, if that's the way you're going to go, until you've completed your mandala and you know what size hoop you need. All right, let's talk about my overall impression of the pattern. I have to say, I was very impressed by this pattern. The photos and the instructions were well written, and I'm going to say easy-ish to follow. There were a couple pictures where she had kept consistently with the first part of the instructions being on the right side of the picture. I know left and right, it's fine. It was always on the right side of the picture, and then the second part was on the left side of the picture. And a couple of them, she like shifted it so that the second thing you do was on the right and the first thing you do was on the left. That was a little confusing and just an honest mistake. We're all people. But if you're going to do this pattern specifically, be on the lookout for that. It's towards the end rows that happens a couple times. Generally speaking, the instructions were well written. Again, I would say lots of twos in this, so that highlighting is so key. I was surprised by how achievable the pattern was. Again, I didn't stumble much with like reading the instructions other than the fact that I should have printed them out way earlier. And I really enjoyed making my mandala. I will say my one complaint about this pattern is that there is no gauge on this pattern. And I get it. What are you going to gauge swatch? That I can see not being helpful, but what I would have loved was when you got so many rows in, maybe for it to say your mandala should be about this diameter, because right up until the end, I thought I was spot on with the size of my mandala. However, when it came down to it, my mandala was much larger than the end result was supposed to be. So while the pattern recommended an 18-inch hoop, I had purchased a 19-inch hoop which ended up being too small. Then I did my rabbit hole of searching and found out that after that, hoops come in 20 and 22 inches. So again, my husband, in all his wisdom, was like, maybe you should somehow figure out exactly how big it's going to be before you go buying these hoops on the internets. Yeah, he was right. So what I did was I have these blocking mats that have a circle. And so I made up the circle pattern and I pinned it out to where I thought it was going to be. And that gave me about a 20-inch hoop. I would have ideally loved to put it in a 21-inch hoop, but they just go 20-22. And honestly, now that it's all finished, I don't know if I made it again, I might go with the 22-inch hoop. You can see that it fits nicely in here, but if I wobble it, you can see there's a lack of tension really pulling on the stitches, which I think with a mandala is something you really want. All that to say, had there been some sort of gauge for me to say like, oh, I'm doing my stitches bigger and I should go down a hook size, or to just know that I'm probably going to need a lot more yarn than they called for, which I absolutely did. This was, what did I say, 400 and something yards. They said I would need approximately 55 to 65 grams, and I used way more than that. I would say I probably used 80 to 90 grams, which is most of my 400 yards. Oh, I should have said back in the modifications, the one thing I did modify was because my hoop had to be so much bigger, there was a wider space between each of my sections. And so I put more stitches in there just so that it would fit nicely around the hoop. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to say about that? Overall, I had a really good time making this. I had someone message me and say, I made one and I've never stopped. I fell absolutely in love with them, which is amazing. I don't think I've fallen that in love with them. I'm excited to have this hanging on my wall, though now that it's so much bigger, I'm going to have to look a bit to find a place to hang it. But I mean, I don't know that I'll be a one and done, but I also won't be prolifically making these over and over again. So, should you try a mandala? I would say, yeah. If you've always wanted to make one, give it a try. It was easier than I thought it would be and a lot of fun. All right, today I'm wearing my Zoe shawl. This is a nice lightweight summer shawl. It's made in really bold and beautiful yarn by Cornbread and Honey. Did I wear it today because it matches my mandala? Yes, I did. I'm also wearing my fun iridescent earrings by Aquarius Encounters Co. Love these. Links to everything below. Links to the pattern, links to the yarn, links to what I'm wearing, links to the highlighters. I will just give it all to you. You do not need to hunt these things down. Go to the show notes, go to more. It'll all be right there. My only announcement is that the vacation shawls are coming. So if you have not joined my email list, I highly recommend joining over there so that you can get the very best discount code. The first one comes out tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this pattern review and that if a mandala is something you've always wanted to make, I've encouraged you to give it a go. I would love it if you would like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss out on anything. Maybe even share this video with a friend who might also join you in making a mandala. Thank you so much for being here this week. I'll see you right back here next week. Until then, happy crafting.